Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to our Pension Committee Board here at the Grangemouth Community Education Unit, and also all our members online this morning, today, Tuesday, 24th of June, 25. Also, welcome to members of the public that are in attendance behind me today. This is in accordance with Section 43 of the Local Government in Scotland Act 2003. I, as convener, has directed this meeting to allow remote attendance for the participants. This meeting will also be live streamed to allow the public to hear today's pension business, and thereafter this meeting will be available to view on the Falkirk Council YouTube channel. All questions are welcome, as the responsibility of the governance of the pension fund sits with the pension committee as delegated by Falkirk Council, the administrating authority. The Pensions Committee is supported by the Pensions Board to ensure the decisions are made with the terms of the fund rules and with good practice. A note today on the agenda is quite a lengthy agenda. Some items are more heavier than others, but from agenda item 13, it's exclusion of the public, and at that point we'll have a small break. Though if the business is taking longer prior to that, I may have a break at the appropriate juncture. Also want to welcome Debbie McCabe, who joined Falkirk Pension Fund, but there'll be mention of that later again too. So I'm going to commence now formal business. First, do we have any apologies?
We've got apologies from Linda Devine. Convener.
Thank you. Please note that. Number 2 on the agenda, declarations of interest. Any member should declare any financial and non-financial interest they have in any item of business at the meeting, identifying the relevant agenda item and the nature of the interest. I don't see any hands up. Nobody in the room? No. Right, agenda item, moving on to agenda item 3, that's the minute, and it's the minute of the joint meeting of the Pensions Committee and Board that was held on the 18th of March. Unfortunately, I wasn't in attendance at that meeting, but people that was, if you could maybe look it over and agree it or not, I'll give you a minute or so just to look it over. I do have a question from Councillor Spears.
Page 6, EE40. Can we have an update, please?
Sorry?
Page 6, EE40, review of investment principles. Is there an update?
Will I speak, or do you want to speak, Amanda, on that? Right, Amanda will take this, okay?
Thanks, Councillor Spears. So, yeah, the committee agreed to engage specialist external advice with a report to come back to committee with recommendations. We have engaged that specialist external advice. We are working with them to look at what information will come up, how we will structure that, what will come back to committee. Our aim is to bring something back. We're targeting September to have something come back. Now, that might be an interim paper or it might be a final paper. We need to do the work over the summer with our specialist advisor to be able to confirm that position.
Agreed.
Convener, there's no sound online at the moment.
Agenda item 4 on the agenda is rotation of the chair of the board, and Amanda will take that report. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. So this short report informs the committee and board of the rotation of the chair of the board. This rotation happens annually and the position rotates between an employer representative and a member representative, and the makeup of the board is set out in section 3 of the report. During 24-25, Ross Mackenzie has been the chair of the board as an employer representative, and we'd like to thank him for his diligence and hard work in this role. Member representatives have elected Tony Cleary as the new chair for 25-26. And finally, in section 5, we're just noting some potential future developments for the board, and further information will be reported back to committee and board when appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. Do we have any questions or comments on that report? None? Just to welcome Tony as well, the chair passes to yourself. Thank you. The recommendations is the Pensions Committee and Pension Board are asked to note this report. The Pensions Committee and Pension Board are asked to note the chair passes to the member representatives. Do we agree this?
Agreed.
All agreed, right, thank you. Next on the agenda of agenda item 5, which is the unaudited annual report and accounts for 24 and 25. And Amanda will take this again. Thank you.
Thank you, convener. So the purpose of the meeting today is to ask the committee to consider the unaudited accounts of the pension fund. These accounts are subject to Local Authority Accounts Regulations 2014, which is prescriptive in terms of the timeframes for completion and consideration of the unaudited accounts. The requirements are set out in paragraph 3.3, and that includes the requirement to ensure the unaudited accounts are considered by the appropriate committee by 31st of August. The pension fund accounts will be submitted, published and advertised in accordance with the regulations, and this meeting fulfills the requirement for consideration of the unaudited accounts by the 31st of August. A huge amount of work is required to produce the accounts, and the team have worked remarkably well to pull the accounts together in advance of the committee deadlines. And I would like to thank Justina, Catherine and the wider team for their hard work in doing this. So prior to consideration of these accounts today, the committee and board had their first bite-sized training session, and today we covered some key facts on the accounts and the wider statements. So I'll try and be brief in my presentation of the accounts today. Importantly though, when reading the accounts, the committee and board should recognise the facts, figures and information that has been presented already. The joint meetings for the fund receive regular information on fund performance, governance matters, risk and audit activity. So there should be nothing in the accounts, therefore, that's a surprise to the committee and board. Much of the key information is pulled out in the covering report, which starts on page 21 of the agenda, and section 5 of that report covers the key messages from the annual accounts, and I will highlight a few points for you. The funding position is summarised at paragraph 5.2.1 of the covering report on page 22. The fund is estimated to have a funding position of 162%, an increase from the 146% reported as at 31st of March 2024. Each year, the accounts include an actuarial statement, which is signed off by the fund's actuary, Hymans Robertson, and that statement's included on page 170 of today's agenda and provides some commentary on the changes in the fund's positioning statement since the last formal triennial valuation on the 31st of March 2023. As always, the report emphasises that the funding position is just a snapshot in time, albeit it does show a positive and welcome position for the fund. There is a large amount of information included in the report on investments, and some of this will be covered by the investment review paper later on today's agenda, which looks at the performance of the fund to the 31st of March 2025. The Joint Investment Forum, which includes independent advisors, are generally happy with fund performance and no significant concerns have been raised. Investment returns are summarised at section 5.3 of the covering report, and it's important that a long-term view of performance is taken. At this stage, officers are generally happy with fund performance, which has been reviewed through the Joint Investment Forum. The accounts include an investment market review on page 72 of the agenda, followed by information on investment policy, asset allocation and mandate, and manager information. Investment performance is set out in more detail in the accounts, and that can be found on page 83 of the agenda. During 24-25, the fund return outperformed its benchmark, and this was also the case over the last 3, 5 and 10-year periods and since inception. The fund's approach to responsible investment is included at page 92 of the agenda. Section 6 of the cover report references the annual governance statement, which is on page 157 of the agenda. The governance compliance statement, which is unique to the pension funds and which assesses the fund's compliance with the best practice principles as set out in the SPPA best practice guidelines, is at page 164 of the agenda. And again, these statements should reflect the committee and board's understanding of how the fund is operating. Information on administration activity begins on page 61 of the agenda and includes performance statistics. And this section of the report highlights the large volume of work undertaken by a relatively small team. Finally, the two key statements are on page 119 and 120 of the agenda. That is the pension fund account and the net assets statement, respectively. These show that the closing net assets as at 31st of March 2025 were 3.556 billion, which is an increase of 111 million from the previous year. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. I'm now going to open it up if anybody's got any comments at all they would like to say, or yes. Mr. Cleary, I see you've got your light on.
Yeah, thank you. It's something that's kind of struck me before, but I've not said anything about it. But I do think it would be a good idea, perhaps, to have some kind of glossary of terms towards the back of the report to explain LDI, gilts, real assets, because I think an awful lot of people reading the report wouldn't actually understand what that was. So purely a thought.
Amanda, can you?
Thank you. I think that seems like a good, I think that would be a good idea, and I think it's quite reasonable to ask. I am conscious of how big the accounts already are and slightly weary of sort of adding to that, but I think it's certainly something that we should consider moving forward. So thank you for that suggestion. I'll make a note of it.
Thank you, Mr. Cleary. Councillor Hannah, I believe you've got a question or a comment.
Yes, I just to ask for perhaps a little more clarification. Following the revaluation, we see that the contributions are less than the benefits being paid out, yet we've got 162% in the fund. It's a kind of an apparent contradiction that we're in a kind of more negative position in terms of the contributions, but we're in a positive position in terms of the fund. I wonder if you could just clarify it.
Thank you. I'll maybe jump in, but someone else may want to jump in. But I suppose, so the funding position is at a point in time, and it also takes into account what the expected returns are for all the fund's investments. So it takes into account what the likely liabilities are and what the likely returns are for our investments. And at this point, what it's saying is that we are more likely than not to have sufficient funds to pay all the benefits. And because we're more likely than not to have sufficient funds to pay the benefits, then we can reduce the employer's contributions ever so slightly. So that's sort of roughly how that's operating. What Debbie would like to.
I'd also say on the net cash flow scenario, it's about the maturity and the fact that it was swung from more less active members into more deferred and people paying pension side of things. So it's a kind of moment in time scenario depending on contributions being paid and that balance of it. Overall, as Amanda says, so there's kind of two different points in time that maybe are more difficult to compare like with like.
Thank you, convener.
Thank you, Councillor Hannah. Mr. Whitty?
Thank you. I suppose a comment and a question. The comment is around the size of the statements. I know you said in the training a few minutes ago you included stuff to try and make it more accessible. But I wonder if there comes a tipping point where when somebody picks up 150 pages, it actually doesn't become accessible. They don't know where to start looking. And I wondered how much of the information there was then duplicated in other documents that I'm still getting my head around all of that. So, you know, I suppose is it making it accessible? And I appreciate the what's trying to be achieved, but then most people probably wouldn't find the right sections. I do wonder if there's an element there. So that was my comment. My question was around what comes through. There's, I fully understand there needs to be caveats around it. The one that comes through very strongly is the volatility, and it's in this report and others around particularly the political volatility in the world. So I suppose there's, to me, it's just how volatile is the volatility, in the sense that I understand why there's a need for that caveat, but if it comes to a point where things are so volatile that actually taking a point in time almost is, well, yeah, but it could swing hugely the next day. I'm thinking of some of the percentages. So how do we ensure that feeds into the risk level that we're happy to take? You know, some funds are looking at payment holidays around Scotland. I know this one isn't, and it's around just that risk level that we're comfortable with, given that the volatility could change some of these figures the next day around it. And it does seem that it's very strongly caveated in it, and we can all see the volatility around the world. So it's just how volatile is that, and how do we make sure we factor that into our assurance that we are factoring that into the risk that we're prepared to take.
Thank you, Mr. Whitty. Okay.
Thank you. I think on your first point, just in terms of the size of the accounts, I think this is an issue that all sort of public sector bodies are struggling with, because we will prepare the accounts in accordance with the relevant codes, and also we go through that regular external audit process, and that is quite prescriptive in terms of what they want to see. And I think if you look across the public sector, and if I look at the council's accounts as well, they just sort of seem to grow and grow and grow. And there's quite often a lot of discussion about how do we put that back? How do we try and make them more accessible? And I think the point I was trying to make in the training is the management commentary is probably the bit that tries to summarise all the key information for a reader of the accounts. So in theory, you could read that and you should have a sense, and the auditors will review it to see, does that give a true and fair sense of the funds, without someone having to go and look at all the different statements, because if you don't know how the accounts are prepared, you don't know the detail, those statements might not mean a lot to you. So I think it is really an issue that, as I say, all public sector bodies are struggling with, in terms of the size of the accounts and how useful they are. In terms of the volatility, you're asking how volatile is the volatility, and I'm not really sure I could answer that. And I suppose what I would say is that so as you know, and we'll come on to the paper, we have a joint investment forum. We regularly discuss, and I'll give an update later today in the agenda of the meeting that happened at the start of June. And as part of that, there's a lot of discussion about, well, what are the appropriate actions for us to take? Do we need to react? Do we need to do something, or are we are we feeling that we're in a fairly comfortable place? And actually, Albert will touch on it, I suspect, when we come on to the investment review. Our feeling is at the moment we are relatively protected, because the mandates we have are quite low risk. And so therefore you'll see that for 24-25 we did outperform the benchmark, and part of that is because of that kind of defensive nature of those mandates. But certainly that's something, I mean, I think at the moment, how volatile is the volatility? It feels exceptionally volatile, and so that discussion happens at a quarterly meeting, but in the interim as well, if there was a significant development that meant action had to be taken, you know, we would be prompted to do that as well. I think it'll be interesting to go through the valuation, the funding valuation for the next sort of triennial big exercise. We do have as you'll have seen in the papers, we'll go through that with a different actuary. And so that will be a different experience. But for me, I think taking that prudent approach is obviously key to making that success.
I just come back on the account suggestion, having said they're too long, could you add half a page that says to people that the commentary, the management commentary is a summary of it all? And what I found really helpful was your introduction saying page 61 is this, page 90. Could you just have that as bullet points? So if you just want a quick governance summary starts at 93 and whatever, half a page at the beginning if the auditors are happy with that in the accounts, just to point people, if you just want a really quick overall summary, just read the management accounts on page whatever. There's a bit more on governance on page 91. There's a bit, the key table of assets and liabilities is on page 119, 120. That maybe just helps point people to a quick summary. But thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Whitty. That was a good idea, and it's handy to have that summary at the beginning, isn't it? Because it directs you to look further. Thank you. Councillor Spears.
Just to welcome Debbie and thank Justina for bending our mind over the last week reading this. Just to mention investments, it will be interesting to hear your delivery on the investment forum, and obviously later in the year the investment review. So a lot of these things have still to be decided, but we need to remember we're here to help our members, and in very difficult financial times, then that should be the utmost objective.
Mr. Davis.
Hi, I have one observation and two questions. The first observation is that my name seems to have been misspelt in the annual report. It's Davis with an E, just for observation. My first question is on 5.2, the reduction in fund liabilities. Would I be correct in thinking that's down to a change in inflation expectations? I'd be grateful for some explanation on that. And my second question is on 5.3, the investment returns. It's not clear if those returns are net or gross. Perhaps you could tell us, and going forward, perhaps we could make a note on that table to say, make it clear whether those returns are net or gross. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Amanda, do you want to?
So the funding metrics, as you say, are set out in 5.2, and I think, as I maybe mentioned, the actuaries' report on those estimates is included. I'm just apologies, I'm just skimming through to look for it. I think I said page 170. So that talks about the funding position, and it talks about the changes that have been made since the last valuation was undertaken. So yes, I think part of what you're talking about is inflation and liabilities, and we have seen that reduction in our liabilities flow through to the funding matrix. So I'm sorry, I'm just scanning the page. I think 171 talks about the methodology that was used to update the liabilities up at the top, page 171. In terms of your other question, sorry, I've scribbled it down, net or gross, I'll let Justina come in on that one.
So far, we always reported a gross return. At the moment, we have looked in the past of trying to report on a net, but this is not a very straightforward because of how the data flows. So if you think about it, you may receive an cost. The invoice might come like 3 months after the event. So let's say if for the 31st of March, we may receive an invoice in June for that period. And it's better we would have to go back, reopen the periods. Some of the fees are collected only annually and come from the cost transparency templates. So it's a very complex process. So at the moment, there is no, we do not have any ability to report net of fees. Also, the performance is calculated by our custodian who provides us this as an external service. We do not calculate the performance ourselves. So there is an issue with data collection, with having to open the periods. I think from the previous discussion with the performance provider, we have also recognized that it would be dips and ups with the performance because there would be a month where you collect the fees, and this would have so that would impact for that month on the performance, where other months the performance will be overstated because you do not have the information on the fees. So there was quite a few things that I do not, at the moment, I'm not aware of any other LGPS fund that would report net.
Yes, I appreciate the technical problems in that, but we have a figure for the net fees paid to the investment managers. So surely we can use accrual accounting just to prorata that over the year. I mean, other financial institutions manage to give net returns, so I see no reason why we can't do it.
While I understand they may provide, however, a lot of this information is collected only annually. Therefore, we could investigate this further with the custodian, but a lot of this, we just don't have this data, even for us to understand fully the cost. Certain exercises, we do receive this information only once a year, especially for a unitized fund.
Yes, sorry to pursue this point, but later on in the accounts, we talk about the performance relative to the benchmark, and it talks about outperformance on a gross basis, but on a net basis, we're clearly underperforming the benchmark. So that this, in my view, is giving a very misleading account of the investment returns, and that is fundamentally misleading the pension fund members.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. I mean, we will look into that further, actually, and we'll come back to you on that particular point. Is that okay? Thank you, Mr. Davis. Next, Julie West would like to speak. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I was going to offer to respond to the question on the decrease in liabilities. So there was a question about the decrease in liabilities, was that linked to inflation? It was just to confirm that the decrease in liabilities is as a result of an increase in future return expectations. So if you expect that your investment returns in the future will be higher, then you can hold less money now. So that results in a decrease in liabilities. So inflation has been, expectations are broadly stable. The reason for the decrease in liabilities is because of the change in future investment return assumption.
Thanks, Julie. Sorry, I'm finding it difficult to hear a little bit because of the noise in the background. I don't know if anybody else is finding it difficult to hear. Sorry.
Excuse me, convener, can I just ask you to bring your microphone closer to you? Because I think for those who are online, it's maybe you're not as close to your microphone as you could be.
I mean, the noise is quite loud actually outside. Sorry, Julie, could I ask you to repeat what you said, please?
Of course. I was offering to respond to the question on whether liabilities had decreased as a result of a change in inflation. And it was to confirm that the liabilities have decreased as a result of a change in future expectation of returns on the fund's assets. So we now expect that the fund's assets will earn more money in the future than we previously did. That results in a decrease in liabilities, because if you earn more in your future investment returns, you need to hold less money now. So it was to confirm that the decrease in liabilities is because of a change in future investment return assumptions, and rather than a decrease in inflation expectations.
Thanks, Julie, for that. Appreciate that. Do we have any other questions? Sarah, do you have a question? So we're moving forward now. Sorry, agenda item 5. Recommendations. The Pension Committee and Pension Board is asked to consider and comment on that unaudited annual report and accounts 2024-25 of the Falkirk Council Pension Fund. The Pensions Committee is asked to approve the fund annual governance statement. So do we agree?
Agreed.
Right, thank you. We're moving on now to moving on to the Internal Audit Annual Assurance Report 6, and it's Sarah that will take this report. Thank you.
Thank you. This report is the 24-25 Internal Audit Annual Assurance Report. The purpose of this report is to summarise the work Internal Audit have undertaken over the course of the last year, and to provide an overall opinion on the Council's arrangements for risk management, governance and control based on that work. The report also comments on our compliance with the public sector internal audit standards. As you can see from section 2, I asked the Audit Committee to note the sufficient internal audit work was undertaken to support a balanced assurance, and the internal audit can provide substantial assurance on the Fund's arrangements for risk management, governance and control for the year to 31st of March 2025. Section 5 of the report explains the reviews undertaken as part of the 24-25 Internal Audit Plan, which was approved by the Pension Committee. Paragraph 5.6 to 5.11 provide details on the transactional testing. It is noted that a sample of 60 was taken, with one minor discrepancy noted in a contribution rate of 0.1%. This will be raised with the member's employer by the pension section. Also, interest had been added to 8 lump sum pension payments, pension payments due to not being paid within 1 month. The delays were not caused by the pension section and were due to the late receipt of final pay information and late receipt of members' AVC investment from Prudential. Paragraph 5.12 to 5.19 provides details of the other review on the audit plan, which was the pension fund governance arrangements. We were content that there is compliance with the governance policy and arrangements in place, which contribute towards the robust stewardship of the fund's assets. The review of both the audit areas, as previously mentioned, represents the 24-25 programme of works. Internal audit, as previously mentioned, can provide substantial assurance in respect to the fund's arrangements for risk management and governance and control for the year to the 31st of March 2025. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to open it up. Has anybody got any questions? Mr. Whitty?
Hi, thank you. No, thanks for the report. It was just to get a gauge. You sampled 60 transactions. How many transactions were there undertaken in total? Because obviously you found an error 1 in 60. So it was just to see how does that extrapolate? How many transactions could you have looked at? But my other's just a comment. Obviously, you've got substantial, limited, or no assurance. Whenever you've just got 3 choices, it's actually quite limited in where you put that. So I wasn't sure if this is internal audit, if that's a Falkirk Council internal choice just to have 3 categories. Because if you have 5 categories, you've got a bit more leeway of because at the moment it's substantial, which when you first read it, that's great. And then you look at the 3 levels and it's like, well, there's either no assurance, which I hope we're sure we never get to that point. So you basically got a choice of 2, limited or substantial. So I just wondered if there was more categories and who defined those categories, if that's an internal choice and can be looked at by the council. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Ritchie. You have seen the definitions of all the insurances, I take it. Sarah, could you come in on that? Thank you.
Yep, no problem. As with regards to the sample size, I don't have the exact number with me just now, and my mental arithmetic isn't good enough to figure this one out for you. But the sample of 60 represented 4% of the overall transactions for the pensions. So in 60, we did have split down to, I think it was 25 for new members. We'd split it down to certain areas within, it was reasonable amounts. With regards to the 3 assurance levels, it's a common practice for 3 levels of the assurance. Most of the public authorities do 3 levels, and in conjunction with the public sector internal audit standards. It's something that we could look at, but this then makes the pension fund as in line with what we do within the council as well. So yeah, it is sort of common practice around other councils as well, using the 3 assurance levels.
Thank you, Sarah. Amanda wants to come in too. Thank you.
Thank you, convener. I suppose I was just going to flag, if you look back, it doesn't give you the exact numbers. If you look back to sort of pages 68 and 69 of the agenda, that gives you the sort of case numbers that the team have been dealing with. So you can see some of the sort of numbers of transactions there. Just in terms of what Sarah was saying, in terms of the levels of assurance, they're obviously, our internal audit team have to comply with the standards, but also we are subject to an external peer review, which has to happen periodically. We're in the middle of getting that review in terms of just everything to do with our audit function, and we're anticipating getting that report. I don't believe that this has come up as an issue within that report, because as Sarah said, I think it's quite standard. But I suppose maybe just to give some comfort that the internal audit service processes are subject to quite a rigorous review periodically. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. We have Mr. Mackenzie wants to ask a question and make a comment.
Thank you. I think it's just a question for the managers on the interest payments paid for late lump sums. I believe some pension funds would seek to recoup that back from the employers, given that's where the ultimate fault lies. I don't know if that's something that's under consideration, and I'm assuming that the amounts that we're talking about here are not material to the overall fund position. Thank you.
Amanda.
Thank you, convener. Thank you, Ross. I think, yeah, we don't recoup those funds, and I suppose in any of these kind of scenarios, we would have to weigh up the costs of administering that versus the actual amount of interest that we would recoup. I think we have been considering whether we need to look at a sort of administration strategy, which would set out the sort of roles and responsibilities with the employers and ourselves. Obviously, it's a bit of a changing landscape because we are now on iConnect, for example, and all the way the data is transferred is quite different. What was a manual process is now more automated. So that does give us a sort of, that might be a sort of opportunity to maybe look at our administration strategy or look at developing administration strategy. But I think it's, you know, at the moment we're focused on the work for the dashboard, for example, in terms of administration. But I think certainly that's something that will be on our to-do list.
Thank you, Amanda. Do we have any more questions at all? I don't see any hands up or lights on. I just want to make a comment. Once again, internal audit has provided substantial assurance. This reflects a high standard of expertise with our pension fund team, which complies with robust stewardship and our legal requirements. Thank you to Isabel, the internal audit risk and corporate fraud manager, for doing this work. So I'm going to move on to the recommendations now. It's recommended that the Pension Committee and Pension Board note that sufficient internal audit work was undertaken to support a balanced assurance. Internal audit can provide substantial assurance in respect of the fund's arrangements for risk management, governance and control for the year to the 31st of March 25, and the internal audit section operated with no real or apparent impairment or restriction to scope, independence, objectivity of internal audit activity during the year. So do we agree this?
Agreed.
Yep.
Thank you. So we're going to move on now to agenda item 7, which is a internal audit plan 25-26. This will be taken by Sarah again. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. This paper sets out our proposed programme of work for the 25-26. After discussion with the pension manager, there are two main areas for review. Firstly, at paragraph 5.2, we will be undertaking transactional testing on the fund. This be achieved by sample checking pension rights that have been transferred in or out of the fund correctly, retiring fund members have received their correct pension payment, and lump sum payments have been correctly paid. At paragraph 5.3, we will undertake review of the ongoing involvement with the pension dashboard programme. This will focus on the policies and procedures in place for the live update to the dashboard. Paragraphs 5.4 to 5.6 provide background to the audit process, including the preparation of an annual assurance statement. To finish, I draw your attention to the recommendation at paragraph 2.1. In particular, can I ask that committee approves the internal audit plan for the year, but to bear in mind the need to be flexible, and the internal audit will direct resources to where they're most needed, and notes the provision of an annual assurance report. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to open it up. Does anybody have any questions on agenda item 7? I don't see any hands up. So will we just move on to the recommendation? As recommended that the Pensions Committee and Pension Board approves the proposed Falkirk Council Pension Fund Internal Audit Plan 25-26 and notes that an annual assurance report will be provided. Do we agree?
Yes. Agreed.
Thank you, everybody. So we're moving on quite fast there to agenda item 8, which is review the fund's cessation policy. And I'm not sure who's going to. It'll be taken by Julie. Thank you.
Thank you. So we recently reviewed the cessation policy for the fund, and the cessation policy is an accompanying document to the fund's funding strategy statement, and that sets out the guidelines by which the fund will collect money from its employers. The reason that we updated the cessation policy is as a result of two changes in regulation. The first of those changes was the introduction of what we would call a 90-day guarantee that allows employers who would like to leave the fund to request something called an indicative valuation. And that indicative valuation and the results of that have to hold for 90 days. So the purpose of that is to allow employers who are planning to leave the fund to have a little bit more certainty about the money that they may have to pay or receive back when they exit the fund. The second change in regulation was allowing some discretion by the fund to determine the size of an exit credit. And an exit credit is the payment that would be made back to an employer on their exit from the fund. When the regulations changed initially to allow the fund to pay exit credits to an employer, there was no fund discretion. So the regulations have now been brought into line with those in place in England and Wales. So the update to the cessation policy reflects those two changes in regulations and the guidance within which the fund will operate when carrying out those indicative valuations or determining an exit credit. The updates have been designed to balance both the needs of protecting the fund, any exiting employer, and also balancing the needs of any the employers who would also be left in the fund following an exit. So it's all in the paper. I'm happy to take any questions on that update.
Thank you, Julie. I'm going to open it up for any questions or comments. I believe Mr. Whitty would like to ask something.
Thank you. Thanks for this. I mean, my reading of it is that, you know, there's an increased risk to the fund because of that needing to guarantee the 90 days and that's what's driven. So I'm assuming the policy is tightening that up so that it doesn't show what the changes to the policy are from the previous one to compare. And I've just got one specific question on section 3.2 of the policy. The last point says the risk-based corridor approach does not apply for indicative valuations. Is that the corridor that's mentioned in section 3.1? I just wanted a bit of clarity around what was not applying risk-wise to this new approach for indicative valuations. Thanks.
Sure. So when an employer exits the fund introduced, so we've called it risk-based corridor, and that was introduced with the intention of allowing easier planning for an employer who wanted to exit. So what the risk-based corridor does is it allows a range of values within which the fund will accept. So there'll be a full range within which the fund won't pay an exit credit or also won't ask for a deficit. However, we've said that won't apply in the case of an indicative valuation because there is that little bit more risk when the fund is having to provide that guarantee. So an indicative valuation would be carried out at one point, if you like, in that corridor at the upper end, which is a little bit of a safety mechanism protecting the fund while it guarantees that position for 90 days.
Thank you, Julie. Mr. Whitty, do we have any more questions at all? Don't see any lights on, comments. I do have a question myself. Julie, with regard to 4.1, can you give us an example why a fund would stop within 90 days of the request? And regarding the indicative position, and regarding indicator must be used, or can discretion in this scenario be used as you mentioned underneath 4.1, the fund is also now required to exercise discretion. But you were quite specific in 4.1 that the indicator position must be used. Thank you.
Yeah, so 4.1 is so section 4.1 is making it clear what the responsibilities are of the employer. And so what the fund is asking is that the employer are clear about their intended date of exit. And what you would want to avoid is the case where an employer says they would like to exit, and we do calculations based on that intended exit, but the employer then opts to leave at a different date, so potentially trying to seek more favourable results. So 4.1 is asking really for that, the obligation to sit with the employer to be clear about where their intentions are and what dates they intend to exit. And in terms of the fund's discretion, so the fund now are able to exercise discretion. There are other areas where they can exercise discretion. So, for example, in terms of repaying a deficit over a period of time, but this update also allows discretion over the size of any exit credit, so any payment back to an employer.
Thanks for that, Julie, the further clarification. Appreciate that. Do we have any other questions? Councillor Hannah, thank you.
Thank you, convener. Just a bit of clarification. At 3.4, it says that all employers who have ceased participation since 2018, this applies to. Is there any danger of there being a need to recalculate previous credits?
No, because the way that the regulations are written, the 2018 is the point within which exit credits could be paid, but the updated regulations have made it clear about there's no need to revisit previous calculations. It's forward looking, so anything that happens now.
Thank you, convener.
Thank you, Councillor Hannah. Thank you, Julie. No further questions. So I'm just going to move on to the recommendations. The Pensions Committee and Pension Board are invited to comment on the draft cessation policy, and the Pensions Committee is asked to approve the release of the draft cessation policy to scheme employers and trade unions for consultation. Do we all agree that?
Yes.
Agreed.
Thank you. What I'm going to do now, still got a wee bit to go, but I'm going to allow for say 5 to 10 minutes break. Okay, is that all right? Quite happy with that. Hello, everybody. Are we all back in place now? I really appreciate that. I see all the faces is coming up, which is good. So we're going to restart now, and it's agenda item 9, which is the review of the fund's succession policy. And so agenda item 9. That's fine. So I beg your pardon, we just dealt with that. The wrong number, it's on the sheet. So it's the pension fund business plan. And Amanda, are you going to take that? Amanda
Yes.
will take that.
Thank you, convener. So this report presents the 25-26 business plan for the pension funds. It's quite a short report. It talks at section 4.3 about the key improvement and transformation activity that's planned for the year. I think a lot of this work has already been discussed with members at previous meetings. There's just maybe 2 pieces of work to highlight in particular. The first is the pensions dashboard, and onboarding to the pensions dashboard is included at section 6.2. And this is a big piece of work for the fund. So phase 1 of the work is completed, and that really focused on the creation and testing of matching criteria. Phase 2 is due to start at the end of August, and it's through that work that the fund will establish its connection to the dashboard. There is some work ongoing just now in relation to the ABC providers, and that we've sent them information this week to progress that. So at this stage, we are expecting to meet the deadline of 31st of October 2025. Paragraph 6.2.9 notes that once the dashboard is available to the public, there could be a resourcing pressure for the fund, but that's just something that we will have to work through. And if there was recommendations for committee, we would bring them back. The second piece of work, which is just mentioned very briefly at section 6.3, is the onboarding of the new actuary, and that will need to be done in advance, obviously, of the next funding valuation exercise. And that is a really big piece of work. It sounds simple, but it's actually very significant. So Debbie McRae, the new accounting manager for pensions, who started on the 1st of June, and I are meeting with the new actuary, who's Barnett Waddingham, this afternoon, and we're going to start planning out that onboarding. So they will start from the 1st of September 2025. So we're sort of trying to do some preparatory work for that. So the plans for the committee and board training are also included in section 5 of the report. And I would just highlight at paragraph 5.5 that members are asked to email Catherine with any training undertaken and including the time taken. And we will be looking to pull that information together into future reports. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. I'm now going to open it up for any comments. I see Councillor Spears has got his light.
Yeah, is the new actually actuarial business, or is it internal? Is it an internal actuary?
Oh, sorry, no, it's
Oh,
I just heard the first bit. Is it an actuarial business? Yes, it is. It's an external appointment.
Internal. External.
External appointment.
What company are we using?
It's Barnett Waddingham is the name of the company. So it was Hymans Robertson, it's now Barnett Waddingham.
An Edinburgh company.
I'm not actually sure if they're based in Edinburgh or not.
I think they're nationwide, and they were talking about maybe an office in Scotland, but I'm not sure whether there's one actually specifically in Scotland.
Hello.
I heard a lot about the pensions dashboard. Can you very quickly and simply explain what information will be available on the dashboard?
Well, I can maybe just start and then let Debbie come in if that's okay. So the pensions dashboard is the idea would be that one person can go on and see all their pensions that are available from all the different pension providers that they may have. So some people will only have one, or some people may have moved about and have a number of different occupational pensions, and they should all be available. And my understanding is I think the state pension should be available in there as well. So it should be a sort of one-stop shop where someone can go in and get information about all of the pensions that they have. Just for information, there is a website, the Pensions Dashboard Programme.org.uk, and that provides a lot of information and background to the pensions dashboard. And maybe there's the other thing I'll mention before I pass to Debbie is that at this point, I don't believe that there's a date for going live with the public for the dashboard yet. We will get a 6 months, although our staging date for connection is I believe 31st of October this year, we will then get a sort of 6 months notice of when our site will actually go live, if you like. I believe there is plans to do some testing with the public this year to start building towards that go live date. But I'll maybe let Debbie.
I think, Amanda, you've summarised it exactly as it is. The idea is to bring all your pension pots together, or your pension amounts together in one area, including the state pension, and making sure that's all there along with AVCs. And also, as Amanda said, the dates are slightly, when it's going to be available to the public, not yet clarified. And also, I think we're waiting for information from the regulator, some of which we might hear in September. So that's still to come. So for some further guidance. But the idea is so that MD can log on and see where their pension, what the pension amounts are, and look at that from there in one place.
Is that okay, Mr. Davis? Right, thank you. Councillor Hannah.
Thank you, convener. Just on a very brief bit on the pensions dashboard, will there be an opportunity at any point for the pensions committee to get a demonstration?
I think that's a good idea. I mean, I wonder if we maybe build it into our sort of bite-sized training where we do that sort of 25-minute session before a committee. I think we're not at that stage yet, but certainly I think that would be a good idea to let everyone see it.
Thank you for that. The other question I had was about the training. You know, I always like a good bit of training. So could you circulate for members the training that are available? There's mention there made, such as the modules, but I would like a bit more detail about the training that's available because I like training.
Yeah, happy to do that.
Thank you, Councillor Hannah. There was a questionnaire quite recently. I think all members were asked to complete it.
Yes,
I think
did.
That's good. Thank you, Councillor Hannah. But I think, if I remember rightly, it maybe was only like 50% of members that completed it. But training's always good, isn't it? I've got another question from Nicola MacArthur.
Hi, my question is around the dashboard, and will there be on the dashboard, although all your pensions will be visible, will there be some sort of calculator on there that will allow you to put in, you know, if you wanted to retire at 60, what your pension will be, instead of having to phone the pensions and waiting maybe 8 to 12 weeks for that paper declaration with that calculation on it? Will it have that kind of capacity to be able for members to put in an age and allow them to find out what their pension will be?
Thank you, Nicola. In truth, I'm not sure whether the dashboard would have that functionality for all of the different pensions that you have. I certainly know at the moment you can do that for Falkirk Council Pension Fund. You can go into the system and you can see if you change some assumptions about when you want to retire, you should be able to get your calculations and your figures there. I'm not quite sure if that will be in place for every employer pension as a sort of cumulative in the dashboard. I think that feels like it would be quite a huge piece of work to kind of get that to work nationally, but certainly for Falkirk Council Pension Fund, you can do that.
Councillor Spears.
Will we look at the pensions of people on very low income, make sure that they'll be of a level of security when they do retire instead of a very small pension?
I think we've said before, the pension retirements that people build up are set out in the regulations. We can't adjust people's pensions for their whether they're low income or not. The scheme is the scheme, the rules are the rules, and that's how we accrue people's benefits, and that's how we set the pensions. So we don't have any control over that.
Well, with the present rate of inflation, you know, we have a duty of care to a retired member, and if they done a job that didn't demand some of the very high salaries that are in the council, then a duty of care should be trying to look after them in their own way.
And obviously pensions are adjusted for inflation, but this isn't within our gift, I'm afraid.
With regard, I've got a question. Any more questions? No, I've got a question. Well, it's more a comment. I mean, I worked for DWP for a long while, and you probably noticed quite recently people's state pension hasn't been correct. You know, they've missed out child credits actually, so people have ended up with smaller retirement pensions. And the other point is, like, you know, when you're nearing retirement age, people used to apply for a pension forecast, find out actually what their pension is going to be. So I take it that the dashboard will include DWP, is that right? And your state retirement pension, and it'll work in conjunction with them. So people will be able to see at an earlier stage what their state pension is going to be, and if there's any mistakes being made by DWP, which there has been quite a lot recently. That is all I wanted to say on that point. So no more questions or comments? No? No, so I'm going to move to recommendations. Committee and board are asked to note the work undertaken and developments arising since the last report to the committee and board. Committee and board are asked to note the proposed plan for outstanding work in the fund's business plan for the remainder of 25-26. Do we all agree?
Agreed.
Thank you. We're now on to agenda item 10, which is general governance matters. Is that Amanda? Amanda will take that. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. As committee are aware, it would ordinarily be Catherine that presents this report, and Catherine has prepared this report, but Catherine couldn't be here today, so I am picking the paper up. Although I will say just now I may have to take some of the more technical questions back to Catherine for some support. Some of the paper's already been covered in previous reports, so I'm just going to focus on a few key bits. We've already been introduced to Debbie. I'm delighted that Debbie has joined the Falkirk pension team as the Accounting Services Manager for Pensions. Pensions Committee may recall that we agreed to increase the resources in this area as part of the 24-25 budget, but it has taken some time to get Debbie in post, but we're very much looking forward to having Debbie as a part of the team. The investment review, which is covered in paragraph section 4, notes the agreement to commission an investment review to inform future iterations of the Statement of Responsible Investment Principles. As I'd updated committee and board earlier on, we have identified the supplier, we're in discussion with them on the works required, and we are aiming to bring some initial findings to September committee, potentially with more information to come back to the November committee, but we're just working that through with the supplier at the moment. Section 6 sets out information on the annual benefit statements for 24-25, which must be issued by the 31st of August each year. And that section is really focused on the McLeod remedy, and we're noting it was hoped that McLeod remedy costs, McLeod remedy data would appear on the 24-25 annual benefit statements, but this will not be the case, mainly due to challenges in introducing the functionality to the pensions administration system. So that's not something that's unique to Falkirk, that's something that's happening across the piece. And the last aspect of the report I would highlight is at section 7, and that outlines the amendment regulation consultation taking place in England and Wales. And it particularly draws out 4 proposals. The first is the removal of the age 75 cut-off eligibility for death grants, unpaid additional maternity leave potentially to be made pensionable, making gender pensions gap reporting mandatory, and finally mandatory reporting of the number of people who have opted out of the funds. So that's obviously a consultation exercise that's taken place in England and Wales, so we'll need to see what the outcome is in England and Wales, and also whether some of those regulations may be adopted for the Scottish LGPS as well, but we'll obviously keep committee and board updated as that progresses. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. I'm going to open it up for any comments or any questions. See Councillor Spears has got his light on.
Amanda, you make 75 sound so attractive. Can you expand on the death grant? That is for pensioners to take it when they reach their demise, will then get a death grant.
So my understanding is, so if you die in service, you will get there'll be a death grant for your beneficiaries, but there's a cut-off date to that at the moment.
Is that the same as the cut-off date where you can increase your pension contribution if you're over, is it 65?
My assumption is that's a different regulation. So as far as I'm aware, that's not been looked at this point, but it's a similar scenario in the sense that there's an age limit.
So why are the elderly being treated differently?
I couldn't answer that. This is, as I say, we administer the fund in line with the regulations. We don't have control over these, but we can feed into consultation exercises when we're requested.
In reality, it's quite shameful then, as people are living longer, then we're trying to put hurdles in the way to a long life.
Thank you, Councillor Spears, for your comment. We have Councillor Hannah wants to ask a question. Thank you.
Thank you. I wonder if you could maybe say a little more about the McLeod situation and why it seems to have been dragging out for such a long time. And do we have any end in sight in terms of the implementation?
So I can give you some high-level information. I think this is an area where Catherine is sort of really in the weeds of it and has a much more detailed understanding of it. But essentially, we need to be able to provide the data, my understanding is, to eligible members to allow them to choose between the old and new schemes for the period that's under question here. So that we're removing that age discrimination that was found as part of the McLeod Now, paragraph 6.9 is talking about a letter of complaint being sent to Haywood Pension Technologies. So the vast majority of funds use Haywood Pension Technologies as their pension administration system. And that letter of complaint is about the timescales for getting that fully functional system in place, because effectively the manual workarounds are so onerous that we wouldn't be able to undertake that. What I would say in terms of your question about is there an end in sight, paragraph 6.10 and 6.11 are sort of floating the idea that this may continue to be a problem next year if there's not significant progress on it. And so you'll see that there's lobbying taking place for the same discretion that we have this year not to include it to be in place for next year. And I think that is because, as it says in paragraph 6.10, we're thinking that the system is still unlikely to be functional to include it. So if that's not the case, then we may have a much more significant resource challenge. And I think, you know, we talked about in paragraph 6.7.4, you know, that there was a sort of 1,000 manual calculations required if we used the solution that was on offer at one point, and so that's just not feasible for us. So it's still a knotty problem that we're trying to resolve, but certainly when Catherine's back, I can get her to give a bit more detailed information if that would be helpful for you.
Thank you, convener.
Thank you, Councillor Hannah. I've got Mr Mackenzie.
Thank you, Councillor. Just a couple of observations and one question. First of all, I fully support exercising that discretion on the MacLeod one for the reasons you said there. I think it is unacceptable that we haven't had the tools in place to meet the requirements or what the pensions regulator has been demanding of funds. I've had a couple of emails from them saying how terrible it would be if we don't meet this deadline, and here's how to exercise the discretion and why you shouldn't be doing it, but I don't think we have any alternative option. So as I say, fully support the approach that's been taken here. Other point I want to ask about is the 7.3.2 unpaid additional maternity leave to be made pensionable. Fully support this, I think in general, because it gets rid of another sort of gender discrimination part of the pension scheme. In your opinion, do you think this would be operated in the same way as unpaid sick leave, for example, where employer contributions continue with a student pensionable pay, but with no employee contributions? And do you have any kind of idea about the time scale that this may come in? Although I appreciate it's probably all speculation at this point.
Answer that, Amanda. Thank you.
Thank you. As you say, sort of speculation, I'm assuming it would be something similar to statutory sick pay, but to the sick pay issue, but I'm not certain about what the proposal is and the detail of it. And certainly, as I say, this is a consultation for England and Wales specifically at this point. Now, quite often Scotland do follow TACT, but I don't know what the proposed time frame is or what the outcome of the consultation will be for England and Wales for Scotland to then consider. So I'm afraid I can't give you.
I've got Nicola first.
Thanks, Councillor. My question is around the MacLeod judgment. I just wanted to ask, will the members who are affected by this, for example, if they retire, you know, this year and it's not been sorted, will they be, you know, reimbursed, or is what we're saying is if it's not fixed this year, they'll not get anything back? How is that going to work if you, for example, retire this year?
Thanks, Nicola. I think I would want to go back and double check the process with Catherine. My understanding is that there's some caveats which are discussed with retiring members or certainly flagged to retiring members. But I would want to go back and just double check with her exactly what the process is before I would sort of say anything firmly in this meeting. Thanks.
Thank you, Nicola. Another question, Mr. Whitty.
Thank you. No, it's a useful summary paper, there's obviously quite a lot of unknowns, but I'm just thinking there's potential workload implications for the team around McLeod, the new actuary changeover that's bound to lead to additional work, and thinking of if some of these consultations did come through to Scotland. So I suppose it's, if all that hit at once, is the resource in the team to do that? What would be put on the back burner while those were done? So I suppose it's just managing that risk. And I appreciate I've only been on the committee, on the board a short while for 2 or 3 meetings, but do we have a risk register? I don't think I've seen one at the meeting yet. So I don't know if this sort of thing will be captured on the risk register, just around staffing capacity. Thanks.
We do have a risk register, and that's something you can share, Amanda, is that right? Yeah, we can share with you. We'll take a note of that if that's helpful at all. Do we have any? Sorry, Amanda's going to come back on that.
Sorry, thank you. I think we are very conscious of the staffing implications, given the amount of change and complexity that's consistently being introduced as a result of the sort of changes in legislation and regulations. When we brought the 24-25 budget to members, we got agreement to increase the resource for the team sort of across all the teams, and we've been working to do that. We've also been looking at sort of trying to encourage graduates into the section so that we can train them and sort of increase our available resource in that way. But it's certainly something that we're conscious of. Certainly things like the dashboard, there's a date that we have to meet, so all the effort will be put into that. That may mean that other things that don't have that timely sort of that time frame are sort of deferred or delayed. And so I think when it comes to looking at the budget for next year, which we would be bringing sort of around about March, I think we would be considering then whether we felt we needed to increase the establishment, and then we'd be looking for committee approval to do that if that's required. At the moment, I think we've got some stability in, but we've still got some gaps we know that we have to fill. But I think we're probably in a bit of a better position than we were certainly when we brought the budget in 24-25.
Thank you, Amanda. Mr. Davis,
thank you. I'm just curious about the implications of 7.2, the interaction of council LGPS in England and Wales and Scotland. I'm thinking in particular of speculation in the financial press that the Chancellor is going to encourage English and Welsh LGPS schemes to invest in domestic equities. What freedom does Scotland have in terms of LGPS schemes to operate in relation to English LGPS schemes?
Thank you. So I think in that example in particular, what's happened to date is that the Chancellor has set out the position for England and Wales that doesn't apply to Scotland at this point, but the Scottish Government have requested some information from local government pension funds in Scotland to ask where are we investing and to ask about local investments and things like that. So the Scottish Government could make a decision to go down the similar route, but we're not at that point yet. So I think that's a bit of a sort of holding position. We need to wait and see what the Scottish Government come back with. But I think in terms of our real asset base, we have quite a lot of local investment. I suppose it depends on what you term local. So is local UK, is it Scotland only, or is it much more localised than that? But we do have a fair proportion, and I'm trying to remember the figure off the top of my head, and I can't right now, but we do have a fair proportion of our real assets invested locally.
Can I just come back on that? But at what point does the fiduciary duty of the fund clash with a directive from the government?
I think that's a really good question. Obviously, the local assets that we're invested in, we are invested in because we think they're good investments. They tick a lot of boxes for us, and that includes our fiduciary duty. And so I suppose the question to some extent could be, to what extent will governments work to make these assets attractive for investment purposes so that funds will want to invest in them? So I don't think it's as simple as saying you must invest locally. I think there's more of a collaborative approach that's needed. And we have seen that working in some places quite well, and in some investments quite well. So I think there's a lot more conversation to be had around this. Our fiduciary duty stands at this point. So we are still, although we have those local investments, we are still doing the due diligence that tells us that those are good investments for the fund.
Yes, so to be clear, our fiduciary duty is paramount.
Yes, I would say so.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Do we have any other questions or comments? I just have a lot. I was really pleased to see this regarding 7.31, and I know it's not been adopted yet and we've spoken about it. But if that does go ahead in Scotland, I mean, maybe the rules of it will be slightly different, but that is a significant interest to the general public, because I've had quite a lot of questions when people come at me, asking about that. It's a cut-off date, if their family member dies, something like that. So I would like to think, and I'm sure it will happen, that there'll be the communication at the time, if it is adopted in Scotland, that people hear about that as soon as possible, because after all, we've already heard earlier on that males and females are predicted to live longer, so it's just a pity that cut-off age is 75 on that, just to mention that. No more questions, comments? No? So the recommendation, the Pensions Committee and Board invited to note the contents of this report, and again, welcome to our Accountancy Services Manager, Debbie. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on again to agenda item 11, which is the investment review, and that will be taken by Albert. Hello, Albert.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks very much, convener. So just starting on page 227, some brief comments in terms of the market review to end of March 2025. Global equity markets declined in the first quarter of 2025. Apologies for the typo there. That says 2024. There was heightened volatility. So some of the key themes during the quarter, and these continue to today, were renewed trade tensions under the Trump administration and disruption to AI sector leadership, as well as the potential for escalating tariffs. For the 3 months ending March 2025, global equity markets fell 4.3% in sterling terms, partly driven by the depreciation of the US dollar against sterling and other currencies. Looking ahead, markets appear likely to remain volatile, and they continue to be volatile into the current quarter. We've seen the recent geopolitical uncertainty arise with the activities in Iran over the weekend, and this is having an impact on equity markets. We expect that volatility to be likely to continue. Moving on to section 4, table 1 on page 228 shows you the fund's target allocations by policy group and the permitted ranges within which those policy groups can be invested. The table at paragraph 4.3 shows you the change in the policy group allocations on a quarterly basis over the past 12 months. The main thing to note here is the gradual reduction in the equities policy group from 59% to 55% as at end March 2025, bang in line with the target allocation of 55%. This has been offset by the progressive increase in the allocation to sovereign bonds from 10.7 up to 15.3% as at end March 2025. That reflects both progressive increases in the allocation to sovereign bonds, as well as a recategorization of US TIPS, which were previously included under a non-gilt debt policy group. As at March 2025, you can see at the very right-hand side of the column, the main differences relative to the target allocations are an overweight to cash, and this is offset by an underweight position relative to credit and very modest overweights for sovereign bonds and real assets. These positions are reviewed on a quarterly basis at the Joint Investment Forum, which also takes into account advice from independent advisors, and they are broadly comfortable with this position. Table 3 provides a bit more detail on the allocations at different mandate level as at end of March 2025. And at the very right-hand side of that table, you can also see, again, the positions relative to target. Again, it's the main thing that stands out is the underweight to credit and the overweight to cash. Section 5 notes the returns for the fund over different periods. At paragraph 5.3, we note the fund returned plus 1.2% over the quarter against the benchmark return of minus 3.1%. So this was a very strong return, albeit over a very, very short time period. The main driver of the outperformance relative to benchmark was the fund's exposure to lower risk equity mandates, which contributed to the fund's equities returning plus 2.5% for the quarter against the equity benchmark return of minus 3.8%. We note again that performance in the short term can be volatile, so it is important to pay greater attention to the long-term returns, but it is noteworthy that the fund's strategy is performing as we would expect during what was a very volatile period for equity markets. Long-term return data shows the fund has appreciated by plus 7.4% since September 2001, ahead of the benchmark return of 6.4%. Over the 5-year period, the fund has risen 9.5% per annum against the benchmark gain of 5% per annum. So that 9.5 is significantly ahead of the benchmark return of 5%. The other thing to mention there is that the benchmark gain, the benchmark return of 5% is coincidentally close to the fund's actuarial valuation discount rate of 5.1%. So the 5.1% discount rate in the valuation has sort of ended up coincidentally being similar to the benchmark return. So the fund's return is also significantly ahead of that. Over the 5-year period, the fund has benefited from strong equity and infrastructure returns, while UK government bonds have generated negative returns. A new section that we've included at paragraph 5.6 references the risk metrics of the fund. So the risk metrics, what we've included here is data provided by the independent performance provider NT, measures the volatility of the fund's returns, and we've included here the data over the past 5 years. So over 5 years to end March 2025, Northern Trust reports an annualized standard deviation of 7%, and this is compared to the benchmark standard deviation of 10.7%. So the fund has therefore delivered higher returns against the benchmark, so that's the 9.5 versus the 5% referenced earlier, with a lower level of risk. So that's the 7% versus the 10.7. These results contribute to the fund achieving a 5-year Sharpe ratio of 1.06 against the benchmark Sharpe ratio of 0.27. And just to explain what the Sharpe ratio tries to what it represents. It is a measure of the level of return you achieve for the level of risk that you've taken, adjusted for the risk-free rate. So if you get a Sharpe ratio of 1, that is effectively telling you are getting 1 unit of return for every 1 unit of risk. And then you can compare that to the benchmark return, which was 0.27. So the benchmark has only achieved arguably 0.3 units of return for every unit of risk. So a higher Sharpe ratio, all else being equal, is preferable to a lower Sharpe ratio. So these show strong absolute, relative, and risk-adjusted returns for the fund's assets. And we also mention the improvement in the funding level at the most recent valuation was 137% at March 2023. As interest rates have risen since then, and you have seen some of this mentioned in the annual report earlier, given the rise in the discount rate and expected rate of return from the fund's assets, we estimate that the funding level has improved. That was all I was going to say in terms of the performance for the quarter. Happy to stop there for any questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chen, for a full report. I'm going to open it up now. Do you have any comments? Sorry, Mr. Davis. Mr. Davis, sorry.
I didn't hear. Well done on the performance, Mr. Chen. Can I just clarify these returns? You say that you outperformed the benchmark over the 3 months, but am I right in thinking these are gross returns and not net returns? So the actual return to the pensioner is actually less than quoted in these tables. Is that correct?
Yes. So to that earlier conversation, these are gross of fee returns. So I think Justina mentioned the discussions that you've had internally regarding Northern Trust. As a side note to that, it's worth mentioning the CEM benchmarking exercise which the fund carries out, which I think you may have had reports on previously. So this is an exercise which looks at the costs for the fund over the year to 31st of March. And over the past 5 years, the average cost has been broadly around 60 basis points over the past 5 years. So for the 5-year return, the 5-year return of 9.5, you could deduct 60 basis points as a proxy for that, and then you would have achieved a return of 8.9 against the benchmark return of 5. So that's still far and away ahead of the benchmark over that period, over the 5-year period. The other thing to mention, just in terms of the costs, and this may have been covered in the CEM benchmark paper that was presented, is that the trend of the fund's costs has been coming down. So 5 years ago, it was around 70 basis points, which was broadly in line with the LGPS average. The most recent report for Falkirk, and this is to the end of March 2024, showed that the fund's costs were now around 48 basis points or thereabouts, which is below the LGPS average that CEM calculate is around 70. So the trend has been towards lower costs in terms of the fund's investment management arrangements.
So, sorry, that 60 basis points, is that per year?
Yes.
Yeah. So for 5 years, it's actually a sort of knocking off 3%. So that 5-year return is actually 6.5. It's only 2% above the benchmark.
No, because the 5-year return is an annualized figure. So the 9.5 is an annualized figure. So you're only taking away the 0.6. If you're going to take away the 300 basis points, you would have to, then 5 years return would be, for instance, like 45% minus 5 would get you to 40 or whatever the number would be.
Right. So since inception, that 1% outperformance will actually be more like 0.4?
Yeah, 0.4 to 0.5, I suspect, yeah. And it will vary over different periods. So this has been a period within which the fund has done very well relative to benchmark. This has been a period over which equity markets have been quite volatile. So it is the sort of post-COVID bounce, and then you had some volatility in 2022, and we have had more recent volatility as well. So, yeah.
Okay. Just two more points. You talk about the Sharpe ratio, but the Sharpe ratio, you're comparing two different asset class, interest, fixed income and equities. Surely a better measure of your risk-adjusted return is information ratio.
The Sharpe ratio is, so the information ratio is another measure. The Sharpe ratio is at fund level, so it allows for the overall strategy. So it's not just for equities. The Sharpe ratio is at fund level, and that is the report that CEM use in their separate benchmarking, and the Sharpe ratio is generally well accepted as a overarching level of risk-adjusted return.
Okay. So yeah, so going forward, can we make it clear on these tables that these are gross returns?
Yeah, that's we can certainly add that as a note, just to note that the returns are gross. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Councillor Hannah.
Thank you, convener. Thank you, Albert, for the report. Can I maybe just ask you to say a little more about the credit and cash and the variation from the target? Is that having any impact on the fund? And is there any need for any action in terms of bringing it closer to the target?
Yeah, sure. That is the most obvious difference relative to the target allocation. I think one thing we should say about the target allocation is that is a central neutral position. And so deviations to the target, some will be just a function of just market movements. So these will move around, and other times they will be deliberate based on advice from the advisors and a view on the relative attractiveness of a particular policy group relative to other alternatives. So the reason for the credit underweight is twofold. So the first reason is that credit spreads have been very, very tight. And by that, what that means is that the amount of return that you're being paid for taking that level of credit risk isn't high relative to how much you could earn from credit historically. So credit from an advisor view and a generally market view is that credit is perhaps less attractive than it has been historically. So that's one part of the reason. The other part for it being underweight is that there has been a review of the Baillie Gifford investment grade mandate. And so because there have been some disinvestments from that, that is why there is a slightly higher cash balance. So in time, when a new mandate or new manager is appointed, the cash weight will reduce. And in the meantime, cash is currently paying on account anywhere sort of from, depending on where you are, anywhere from 3 to 5%. So in the meantime, that is not a bad place to be if you think markets are going to continue to be volatile. The other thing I would say is that it's not a hugely material. I think when you look at the numbers on the page in the table, you see +3, you see -3. Bear in mind that +3, -3 is relative to the 100, so it's not a hugely overweight or underweight. Though I know relative to the targets, it looks it's a bit bigger than it is. But in the context of the overall fund, it's not a hugely active position in terms of impacting the fund's future returns or its risk.
Thank you, convener.
Thank you, Councillor Hannah. We have another question from Nicola McCarter, please.
Thanks, convener. Hi, Albert. My question refers to section 5.5. The UK government bonds have generated negative returns. Is there any long-term actions from that? Do we just monitor that? I'm just wondering how that works. Are we worried about it?
So I think we are relatively comfortable with the position in government bonds. So the fact that they have generated negative returns in and of itself isn't so no one likes negative returns, but they are a part of the fund's investment strategy. The other aspect about the negative returns on the government bonds is those negative returns also reduce the value of the fund's liabilities. So at the same time as the government bonds have been coming down, the value of the fund's liabilities, which are much larger, have also been coming down. So in some ways, the government bonds act as a match to the value of your liabilities. And the other aspect for holding the government bonds is that typically under different market environments, they will behave quite differently relative to the other assets within your portfolio. So they represent a small allocation. So bear in mind, they're only 15% and no one likes negative returns. But the other thing to add for context is UK government bonds had been very, very low post GFC. And so that was a period of almost 10 years when they had been very, very low, and now they have risen, and that has been the cause of the negative returns that you've seen in government bonds. Does that mean they can't be negative going forward? Again, we don't have a crystal ball, but the main thing to remember is that they're a part of a much larger and diversified portfolio that will do something different in different market environments, and that's why we hold them.
Thanks, Albert.
Thank you, Nicola. Thank you, Mr. Chen. Do we have any more comments, questions? No? Just to say, Mr. Chen, thank you very much for your professional responses. We appreciate that here today. I'm now going to move on to the recommendations. Committee and board are asked to note recent investment market developments, the fund's strategic allocation, the fund's performance for the period ending the 31st of March 2025. Do we agree?
Agreed.
That's lovely. We're now moving on to agenda item 12, which is engagement and voting activity. And Amanda will take this report.
Thank you, convener. So this paper is the standard quarterly report that looks at the voting and engagement activity provided by Hermes EOS for Q1 of 2025. And as noted, a highlights report is also uploaded to the SharePoint portal, and the highlights report should be considered confidential. A 2024 annual report has also been produced by Hermes, and members should be able to access that in the same portal. Section 4 of the paper sets out the Hermes EOS approach to responsible investment through engagement, and that's obviously the approach that Falkirk Council Pension Fund has adopted. And obviously we had Hermes EOS do some training with us in January to take us through that approach, so I'm hoping that it's familiar to everyone. Section 5 highlights that Hermes EOS engaged with 60 companies on 256 issues and objectives. Again, details of these engagements are included in the highlights report. And in addition, paragraph 5.2 notes that engagement reports from the Local Authority Pension Fund Forum are also in the SharePoint portal. And the outline voting position is set out in section 6. At this stage, there's no significant issues to draw to the attention of the committee and board. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. I'm going to open it up. Has anybody got any comments or questions on this agenda item? I don't see any hands up. No questions? No. So we'll just move on to the recommendations. The recommendation is Pensions Committee and Pension Board invited to note and comment on report, the contents of the report and reports provided by Hermsey EOS. Do you agree?
Agreed.
Right, thank you, everybody. So now, we've actually got exclusion of the public. So I now have to, do I say something? Do I read this? Are you read, yes?
Yeah, thanks, convener. Just as you say, this is the item which we asked the committee to agree to exclude the public from the remainder of the business, which is on report. So just to clarify, all members are happy with that.
Agreed.
Thank you. We'll now switch to live stream off.